I don't think the changes are worth $30 price up from Last of Us Part 1. Oh yeah, the Last of Us remake I think is kind of dumb. Has the same gameplay. Official footage confirms it as well. Yeah, like I just think I don't like remakes in general, so like this one is just an egregious example of like not necessary, you know? Like the game's not even 10 years old. What about Kingdom Hearts?
Kingdom Hearts remaking the 2.5 and the 1.5.
That's not a That's not a remake. They just
a remaster. Sorry.
Well, not even that. They just ported it. The Kingdom Hearts 1.5 and 2.5 ran at 1080p on PS3, which is actually kind of rare for PS3 games to run at 1080p.
Yeah.
The PS4 version just unlocked the frame rate to 60 FPS,
Yeah.
which was like needed. But again, like it's just the same game. I still think some parts look worse, to be honest. I know, like I've seen parts that like, okay, that looks a bit better, but I've seen parts where it's just like the whole like artistic like point of the scene is gone. Like what I like about The Last of Us 1, like visually, at least in the cutscenes or whatever, is like a lot of like screenshots and stuff, they kind of look like paintings, and like it looks really cool. It's got its own look. But now I'm pretty sure all the cutscenes are in engine, so yeah, a lot of the lighting isn't as good. But like even aside from that, even like if it looks better or looks worse, I don't really give a fuck. Like the game's not even 10 years old and it still holds up really well and it's still playable on modern platforms. There's no need for it. Now you literally have the same game. You have two options to buy the same game on current platforms. It's dumb.
Would you buy another 1.5, 2.5 collection?
No, because the PS, well, depends. If it offers new stuff, like, or more features or whatever. Like I was considering buying the PC version because it's a PC version. You can unlock the frame rate even higher resolutions, mods. But honestly, I might just pirate it. But no, if they made a PS5 version, I would not buy it. No. I think Naughty Dog's a little too hung up on The Last of Us. Personally, I'm done with the series unless they drastically reboot Part 2. No, I think that's dumb. I think so that's not really true, actually. The reason that they're making the remake is because a different studio entirely started the remake. Sony saw that, was like, oh, where is all this money going to? It was like some no-name studio, actually. And they were just like testing their like skills by remaking The Last of Us. And they're like, okay, you guys just do something else. We'll give this to Naughty Dog to finish. So Naughty Dog didn't even decide to make this remake. It just started happening while The Last of Us 2 was being made.
Yeah, I wonder what that company's doing now.
Yeah, I don't even remember the name of it. I don't even know if they had like a name or if it was just like a group of people or something. I really don't know.
Just a group of guys just being like...
Yeah, I think they were assisting in the development of The Last of Us or something. Not anything like drastic, but... yeah, I really don't know.
And they got bored, so they were just...
Yeah, the story's really weird behind it. But like, yeah, Naughty Dog didn't decide to do this.
I love how, like, they were just spending Sony's money, and Sony's just like, yeah.
Like, no, they were contracted by Sony.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're like, where's all this money going to?
Yeah.
Not doing stuff anymore.
But, like, seriously, I just wish, like, they didn't bother with this Last of Us 1 remake so they could just finish Factions 2 and then, like, move on to whatever it is they're going to do next. Which is probably going to be a new IP. Because I'm just interested to see what else they're going to do, you know? Do you agree with the opinion that open goal basically when finished will be the definitive way to play the game instead of PS2? I don't know. I think the original version is always going to be the definitive. Because that's like the original like version. That's what was released. That's what the developers were not necessarily happy with, but that's what they were. That's what they worked on, and that's what they shipped. Like, honestly, I think definitive is playing this on a fucking CRT TV, because then, like, it looks exactly how they envisioned it to look, because that's the technology it was made for at the time. But, that's not always possible, you know. So sad, the fact that I got rid of my big CRT like 10 years ago. Yeah. That's the thing, like, they're so fucking huge, it's hard to justify, like, keeping one or getting one. But they're so cool. I love it whenever I, like, actually can be bothered to set up either of my consoles that are hooked up to it. I really want to get a Super Nintendo so I have an excuse to use it more. No, I'd say the definitive version is the one that's just better than the original in terms of graphics, etc., while not making changes to the original. So far, my PS3 is the best. Nah. See, I don't really care about graphics. I care about what the intent was and the context around its release. So, like, I think playing, like, remasters of games is totally valid. But I think the original is usually the definitive way to play it. Unless there's like game-breaking bugs or whatever that subsequent releases fix, then that's kind of obvious. Like, think of it this way. If I was to play Pong on my computer, emulated, with like a proper controller, like a paddle or whatever, and it was at like 160 FPS, like 4K. Technically, the graphics and everything is like much better than the original. But I still say the definitive way to play Pong is at an original arcade machine, because that's how it was intended to be experienced. Going back about 50 years to make this comparison, but you feel me. Have you heard about Remakes? Basically releasing a remake made for inferior hardware. It'd be funny seeing that stuff. Oh yeah, I've seen the Bloodborne PS1 remake. It's fucking so cool. That stuff is really interesting. Honestly, I think those are much more worthwhile than remakes, because it requires you to think a lot more creatively about how you're going to adapt certain gameplay features or graphic styles for lesser hardware. It takes a lot more creativity to make a demake than it does to make a remake, where you just like make everything look pretty. Not to discredit the work that goes into remakes. I just think creatively they're a bit less inspired. I mean, I get your point, Zeke. I know where you're coming from. I don't really agree, but IMO it's nothing but just two different approaches to what's definitive. Well, yeah, that's the thing. Like I said, it's totally valid to play remasters and subsequent releases. I just don't think it's the definitive way. And that doesn't mean you're getting a worse experience playing a subsequent release. Oftentimes it is better. For instance, Kingdom Hearts 1 on PS4 is the final mix version. It was actually like the source code had to be redone because they lost the original source code. And just shut up, Kira. There's a lot of like weird things the original didn't have, like the ability to skip cutscenes wasn't in the original, but they added it later. It plays at 60 FPS, 1080p. That's great. It plays better and looks better. But I still think the definitive version is the original, because that's what they made. Like for instance, like a lot of graphics and graphic design and art style is dictated by the hardware limitations of the time. Like, the reason Mario has a mustache is to make out the fact that he actually has a face, because there was so little to work with that without that you couldn't determine like that he actually had anything going on there. It just would have been a lump of pixels. And you know, that's important. That's the context of its release. I think that shit's really important to a game, to its artistic vision. It kind of takes away from the technical and artistic achievements when you just replace it with something that looks prettier. Like, the fact that this game is running on a PS2 as well as it does is a fucking feat. And the awe of that is taken away a bit when you're playing it on like a newer console. And like, it may run a bit better, but again, like, this isn't to discredit like anyone playing subsequent releases. I think it's totally valid and fine. This is just what I think is definitive. And definitive doesn't mean every other version is like inferior, or you shouldn't play that version, you should only play this one. I think Zeke means when he says definitive is faithful. I suppose, but it's like, you can't be faithful to anything if you're the original version, right? I guess that is what I mean. Like, no subsequent release can be 100% faithful, because it's not stooped in the context of when it was released. I really think context is like a really important thing with art. Like, no version of Jak 2 will ever be as faithful as the PS2 version, because that is Jak 2. Emphasis on experience. Yeah, I think a big thing that's kind of lost when talking about video games especially is that these aren't consumer products. They are pieces of art to be experienced. I think games as an art form are like the one that like this gets lost on the most. Like, when talking about movies or music or books or whatever, people don't really talk about them the same way as video games, where it's just like, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I like to stream, you lurkers.
I mean, not every game is meant to be an experience, but...
What do you mean by that?
Like, not all of them are meant to be, like, you know, super deep experiences, you know what I mean?
Well, I don't think all games are created equal. Like, I don't think every game is meant to, like, make you feel something.
No, like, you know, some are just, like, a simulation of, like, a sports game.
Yeah.
and stuff like that. Like, you know, like it's
Well, I mean,
perfectly
you're-
valid, but like it's like
It's still an experience. You're not just like
yeah.
being neutral on it.
I mean, yeah, but like everything's an experience.
Yeah, that's that's what I mean.
But like, you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I think what you're trying to say is like not every game is trying to make an artistic statement.
yeah.
And yeah, that's fine. But keep in mind, all these opinions I'm expressing now, I don't expect anyone else to share them. This is just me. Although I do hope that people understand what I'm trying to say instead of just writing it
I get
off.
what you're saying. Like, a lot of people that just think of games as like.
Yeah, just consume. Need game.
Like, I've always been like a pretty big defender of visual novels when people are like, you know, not even a game. It's like,
No,
wow, they're valid.
They are
you just don't
interactive.
like them.
They're interactive, and they are wholly unique from normal novels.
Yeah, I think
like
they're
there's a lot of things that only a visual novel can do.
exactly. You know what I mean? But like, a lot of people are like bad.
I think people are just like, I play video games to have fun, not to read. It's like, okay, sure. Not everyone's like you.
Okay, cool, bro.
Some people like to read.
Cool story, Mark.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that's another thing too. It's like, and you know, as much as we like jokingly dog on like sports games and stuff, it's like,
No, they're valid. I just don't care.
yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't think a video game remake has to be exactly like the original. It should just use the OG as foundation, then improve the game. Okay, so here's my thing. What I hate about remakes as they exist right now is they largely exist to replace the original experience, which I think is shit. Jesus. I think if you're going to make a remake, you should include the original version. Or at least make the original version accessible on current day hardware. So like, you know, Final Fantasy VII Remake came out, and but you can still buy the original Final Fantasy VII on PS4. That's fine. It's not exactly the best example because of what I'm about to say. The only remakes I think are valid are remakes like Final Fantasy VII or the recent Resident Evil ones, where like the original concept and idea for like the game is taken, but the game built on top of that original game is completely different. Like, it might hit the same story beats, but it's not the exact same game. I think those remakes are valid because it's using a source material that already exists, something that people are already attached to, and trying to do new creative things with that. I think that's the only valid remake in my mind, to be honest. Remakes like the Klonoa remake, or even the Crash and Spyro ones, I think are totally unnecessary. As good as they may be, not Klonoa, they might be good, but I don't think they're necessary. When is a remake necessary? If a game is completely lost, but we only have like maybe visual footage, we've got no dumps whatsoever, the game is actually legitimately lost, people trying to recreate that, I think that's kind of valid. I don't know if that's happened before. I just thought of that off the top of my head. Necessary is doing a lot of...
I'm sure there's games that have been lost.
Oh yeah, there's plenty of games that have been lost, but like well-documented ones like that would be like...
Vcast.
Vcast. Yeah, we can remake Vcast.
Let's remake Vcast.
Yeah. Again, the only remakes I think like are 100% valid are remakes that actually try and do something creative with the game they're remaking. Not trying to replace the original. I think the concept of definitive version is dumb. There are always factors that will influence one's stance of what the definite version should be. KH1 and KHFM feel like completely different, but none of those are definitive. Well, KH1 and Final Mix are kind of different games. One just has more content. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like different, like versions.
By your definition, would the PS4 Ratchet game be valid?
Yeah. It's just shit.
Doesn't make it good.
Yeah, it's totally valid. It's just not good. That's the thing.
Look what they did to my boy Dallas.
I know.
My boy Al.
Oh
Man,
boy.
looks like he's been playing with his nephews, if you know what I'm saying.
Jesus. Uncle Brad is bad.
Uncle Brad is bad, no.
Yeah, many remakes just play on people's nostalgia, but I do like seeing Spyro Trilogy's world in HD, I think you mean. And I love the unique designs for the dragons in Spyro 1, all of them are just so good. Yeah, I think that's cool. but I think I'd just rather a new game in that series with like that art style, you know? Like, I'm gonna be honest, I don't revisit the Crash remakes like at all. I just play the originals. But Crash 4 is fantastic. And that's not to like dunk on the quality of the Insane trilogy. I think it's a well done remake. I just don't see it's really necessary. Again, like with all this being said, I need to stress, I don't care if you don't agree with me because most people are not going to agree with me. I just hope that people can understand what I'm trying to say instead of writing it off, because this is kind of a topic that like a lot of people get really fucking defensive over. Like, I see so much fucking discourse about remakes on Twitter and it's like awful. Speaking of Klonoa, I've seen some fucking takes of like people boycotting the Fantasy Reverie series because they didn't include the English dub from the Wii remake. And they reverted back to his original design from the original game. It's like, broski, oh my god. I think my biggest problem though is like these remakes, like I think remakes can be made and they can be like fine. My problem is like the inherent like how like fuck, I'm so bad. My biggest problem is how remakes today are just like treated as replacements instead of a different experience. You know, like if they were to like give us like all the original Spyro games with the Reignited trilogy, I think that would be a lot more good. Because like, you know, seeing an updated take on these games and worlds, I think that can be cool. But I don't want that to be the replacement for the original game. Just sitting in the remake chatter, I almost kind of respect Night Dive's GUs for remaking / porting old games to PC and bringing these experiences to new light. Yeah, porting games is a good thing. I think that's really good. Again, not what I would call definitive. I think the definitive is the original, but I think it's, I think it is the right way forward. Like, you know, bringing old experiences to the modern times is to port them, not remake them. Again, my weird obsession with like everything needs to be original is like a me thing. I don't expect everyone to agree with that, but my remake stance, I think, is a bit more substantial. I think every remake is valid if it introduces new people to something you love and makes it more accessible. It just needs to be... No, but that's the thing. Just port the original and then advertise that, hey, this is available again on this current platform. And then that can spread through word of mouth if it's a good game. I don't think remakes are necessary to bring in new fans. Just port the original. I like that the Halo remake had a button you could switch back and forth between old game and new. That is pretty cool. I'm not sure exactly what the go is with that. If that remake was built on a new engine, or they just used the old engine but updated all the graphics and let you switch between graphics. But that is pretty cool. PS graphics are borderline unplayable today though. No, I highly disagree. I think by most people's standards of what playable is, that's determined by whatever time period they're in. People in the PS1 days thought NES graphics were like unplayable, but we look at them today and we're like, no, that's retro, that's sick. Love to play that. I don't think it's PS1 graphics that make them unplayable, quote unquote. I think it's mostly, it was an awkward time in gaming where developers were trying to get to grips with 3D controls. I think that's what makes them a bit jank and a bit hard to go back to with our modern lens. However, I still think there's still a lot to appreciate there. I think they're still worth going back to. PS1 high res is a mood, to be honest. No shit, hey. PS1 in like 1080p, anti-aliased like hell, looks really fucking cool. I do prefer playing on a CRT, but it's definitely something cool to try out. I've got an obsession with OG hardware, so it's not like I'm much better. I've become a bit like that in recent times too. Did you think the port of the Jack games helped for new fans? Well, yeah, they were ports. They weren't remakes. I think ports and remasters are valid because they just take the original games and make it accessible. Remakes are an entirely different thing. They're completely separate from the original experience. But we're old enough to appreciate the progression of games and technology. Younger kids just think our old games are old and want new stuff. No, every generation thinks that. Every generation has thought this. Kids who grow up playing PS1 put up their nose at games older than that. Back in the, well, at least back in the day. Every generation has always done this. And vice versa. People who grew up playing the SNES will like look at like modern games and be like, pff, pff. They don't make them like they used to. Every generation always does this. This will happen forever and ever. I think PS1 graphics are epic. I love the stretching vertices look. Yeah, me too. I love how PS1 games look. Of course, they don't look as good as games today with, you know, 4K, super ultra realism and whatever, but it's like, it's not really supposed to. I think it's a completely unfair comparison. People will be like, man, this game from like 25 years ago doesn't look nearly as good as this AAA release that released yesterday for my 3090 equipped PC. Broski, unplayable. It's like, what are you doing? It's not what it's supposed to be. Also, some mechanics were gimped by technical limitations back in the day. I don't know if they were gimped per se. I think it was more so developers trying to understand how to implement them properly. Because back in when 3D was first becoming a thing, like no one knew how to do anything. It was a new horizon of technology and game design. Not only with games, although games have technology aspect. If you look at books, you get the same, but then writing styles, yeah. Well, the same with like films and stuff, right? And music. Music has always been limited by technology. Like this is actually a big thing with remakes, right? This is something I've actually been thinking a lot about. We get video game remakes all the time where it's trying to be one-to-one with the original, but we don't do this with any other medium. So like, imagine like we took, I don't know, Jimi Hendrix's first album from 1967. The technology at the time was cutting edge. It was one of the first albums, I think, to use stereo, and they actually really played around with it in some weird, like, to be considered weird today ways, where like vocals would be entirely panned to one ear, or drums would be entirely panned to one ear. Interesting at the time, but as we developed sensibilities of how these things should be utilized, it's a little bit out there, you know? But imagine today, completely different people take those original songs and recreate them note for note, and those are now the only way to experience those pieces of art, aside from like tracking down an original copy of the vinyl, you know, because the original album, the original songs, recordings, they're not available anymore. So we need remakes of these songs. How fucking weird is that? We've got completely different people taking someone's art and remaking it for a modern audience to replace the original. This isn't Jimi Hendrix and the Experience's art anymore. This is someone else's performance, but with the writing of someone else. That's why it's what's so weird to me. Video games are art created by individuals who have visions and who worked their fucking asses off to make this shit possible. And someone else just comes along like 10, 15, 20 years later and does it like with nowhere near as much effort or like creativity, because they're just like taking someone else's creativity and redoing it and passing it off as like the definitive version, like the replacement. That's what's so weird to me. Again, this implies entirely to remakes. Remasters and ports are fine. Doesn't that happen with dead artists releasing unreleased songs, or like MJ or no, that's unreleased songs by those are written and performed by the artist. They just went unreleased and then they're released by. I'm talking about completely separate individuals
on completely different hardware.
On completely different. No, we're talking about music. The music analogy. Completely different people playing with completely different technology, like updated modern versions of like guitars and recording equipment, playing these songs note for note, but making it in like a modern design sensibility. You're not listening to Jimi Hendrix if you're listening to that. Just like you're not playing Spyro if you're playing the Reignited trilogy. You're playing a completely different thing. How about reboots? Again, reboots are fine because like they're taking the original concept and doing something new with it. Like Ratchet 2016. It's just too bad it sucks.
Just
yeah.
Just bad.
Yeah, I think Ratchet 2016, a hot take, I guess. I think Ratchet 2016 is way more valid than the Crash and Spyro remakes. It just sucks. Oh, me too. I'd much rather play those, but I think Ratchet's more valid. The Jimi Hendrix analogy is a great argument. The only difference I can think of is that listening to a song is a more passive experience, so changing it seems more offensive. Wouldn't a more active experience be more offensive because you're actually having to engage on a deeper level. But aside from that, music isn't inherently passive. You can engage with it by like listening intently. Most people just like put music on in the background, which is valid, but that's not how everyone experiences music.
I love the Spyro remix. I love how like because I grew up, like that was my favorite PS1 game as a kid. Spyro was.
Like, don't get me wrong, I loved playing through them. I think they're terrific. And I think they're well made.
Seeing everything, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, whoa.
Yeah, I think that's valid, but my point ultimately is I don't think it was necessary. Again, like, a lot of my issues with like modern remakes would be nullified a little bit if they just included the original to play as well. But they don't, because they're supposed to be like replacements. For fuck's sake, I knew that was gonna happen. Ratchet 2016 sucks because it was tied to a garbage Hollywood-infected movie. It wasn't Hollywood, was it? I thought it was just like some random CG studio that Sony hired or whatever. Either way, yeah. The fact that it was restrained by the movie is ultimately like what led to a lot of its issues. But again, I think it's more valid
does it even follow the exact story of the movie though?
Sort of. Like, it actually has clips from the movie in the game.
Yeah, I know, but like,
yeah.
I don't remember it like following it.
Even listening intently, I don't think is as immersive as holding a controller, making Jack do the things Jack does. It's still Jimi Hendrix playing the guitar. We are only spectators. Yeah. I'm well aware of that. I'm just saying that listening to music isn't inherently a passive experience because you can engage with it. I guess like what you mean by passive is like you don't have to do anything for the art to art, whereas video games you have to work for that art to art, if that makes sense. I class programming as an art form. Actually, engaging in it means to create unique solutions to, well, yeah, like that's kind of what video games are, right? And that's what I mean when it comes to like remaking video games. It like kind of invalidates the achievements of the previous of like the original game, right? Like the team at Naughty Dog had to work their fucking asses off to get this to even run remotely as good as it did on PS2. But if like a new modern team came along and remade it, just be like, oh, okay, so we'll just do the same thing in like this other engine that like we didn't make, because it can do the same thing. Like we can just load more assets in no time. There's no like level streaming that we have to really account for in the same way, because you know hardware is just more powerful these days. Lentils are quinoa. Quinoa is a seed, lentils are a legume. I've had quinoa only a handful of times, and it is nice, but I think the better comparison is quinoa or rice, because they serve the same sort of function. Lentils don't really serve the same sort of function as quinoa. In terms of taste alone, I don't know. They're both kind of like a blandy, sort of just filling taste. But they're good as like a base. Quinoa is good as the base of a meal. And lentils are good to really fill up that meal.